Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the QT2 Systems Strength Training in the off-season, the basics and beyond. Our presenter this evening is Jennie Hansen, and she is in the perfect position to do this presentation. Jennie is a QT2 Systems Coach, a professional triathlete, and also a practicing physical therapist. Welcome, Jennie. Thanks for presenting this evening.
Thank you, Reem, and thanks to everyone for joining us on this lovely Wednesday night. So as Reem said, we're going to talk tonight about kind of strength training in the off season, go over just some basics of why we would want to strength train and what we want to strength train and just how to fit it into our off seasons, how to structure workouts a little bit. All right, so if we start off just with our QT2 5 training cornerstones, I'm sure a lot of you have seen this slide many times before, but strength training really kind of fits into that preparation part of our 5 training cornerstones. Mainly it's a portion of training. I guess you could probably make the argument that there's some facets of it that would fall under restoration and that kind of thing too, but mainly it's another form of training. So before we get started, let's kind of just talk broadly about what do we mean by strength or strength training. So just overall, strength refers to anything that aims to increase a muscle's ability to generate force. So if we relate this to triathlon, when we swim, we're using our arms, our legs to use force to push back on the water and move ourselves forward. In biking, we use force to push down on the pedals and to a lesser extent pull up on them throughout the pedal stroke to move forward. And then when we run, we have to absorb and generate high forces rapidly during stance phase to propel forward. So strength kind of as a whole, it's a function of the size of and the number of muscle fibers and the ability to switch them on quickly and in a coordinated manner. So it kind of our strength is a function of how big our muscles are, our muscle cross-sectional area, and how well we are able to recruit them. And you might also hear power talked about. Power adds in a time component to strength. So power is technically force times velocity. It's how quickly we can generate force. And this is particularly important running wise because when we run, our foot is only on the ground for maybe a quarter of a second. So we need to be able to generate high forces rapidly while running. So with that, when we talk about strength training, what are some of the goals and benefits for this? So overall, a lot of people will strength train to decrease injury risk. If on the like kind of large scale studies, there's mixed evidence, but in my clinical experience, yes, it does help decrease injury risk. It's just hard to individualize programs or apply them across heterogeneous populations in order to really see the benefits for injury prevention in a epidemiological study. And also I kind of put a note in there that tendons in particular, they respond well to being loaded. They respond well to time under tension. So people with a lot of tendon issues, tendon problems will benefit from strength training just because it places their tendons under load and it causes them to strengthen. Strength training also will improve neuromuscular coordination. So that goes back to that aspect of part of strength being our ability to fire our muscles in a smooth, coordinated fashion. So, when we go to run, we want our muscles to be activated quickly and efficiently in order to generate the most amount of force that we can in a short amount of time. Strength training can also delay muscle fatigue. It has some benefits in terms of just changing muscle fiber types to more fatigue resistant types. And strength training has also been shown to improve run and bike wise to improve our top end speed and top end power. So it might not seem that crucial and over the course of an Ironman, but it kind of, you have 25 seconds to make a pass in a triathlon. So, and sometimes you might be trying to outsprint a competitor. So those are the times where strength training can have benefits from a competitive standpoint. It also has been shown to improve running economy. So what this means is that you can run faster at a lower oxygen cost. Basically, it makes you a more efficient runner. Part of the reason for that is that when we run, our tendons store energy and return it. They act like a spring, especially our Achilles tendon. So strength training helps to improve our tendon's ability to store and return energy and give us these nice springs. Strength training also may help with bone mineral density, and it does help maintain muscle mass of the age. There's also, a lot of evidence that it has hormonal benefits, especially for postmenopausal women. And when combined with, a lot of times endurance athletes have these concerns that strength training is going to make them bulk up or gain weight or impair their cardiovascular adaptations. This kind of unfounded. It doesn't happen when combined with endurance training. And and even if muscles do increase a little bit in size, it's beneficial. It's not going to be something that's going to harm endurance performance. So if we look at kind of globally what we need in order to do triathlon or run, at the bottom of this pyramid is we need mobility. We need this ability to move our joints and our limbs through ranges of motion that are needed for our sports without compensation. Without that, and everything else kind of falls apart. Above mobility, we need stability. So this means we need to have a stable base from which our limbs can generate force for movement. So basically, it means our trunk and our spine needs to be able to stay stable while our arms and legs are trying to generate these forces in order to move for triathlon specific movements. Just to kind of steal a saying is, the analogy is trying to fire a cannon from a canoe. If the canoe's moving all over, you're not going to be able to fire the cannon. Then sort of at the top of this pyramid, then we have our strength, and then above that, the power. So then once we're stable enough, then we can work on our force development over time. So, and then just for tonight, we're going to focus, this mobility stuff, that's a lot of like our stretching, foam rolling. That's a little bit more rehabby. So I'm going to be focusing mostly on the stability and then strength. And then power is pretty high level too. I'll touch on that, but won't get a ton into it. All right, so going back to our stability and strength needs, where do we need stability and strength to swim and bike, run? So when we run, I'll show a picture of this shortly, but our major movers, our major propulsive muscles that help push us forward are going to be our calves and our quads, and also our hamstrings and hip flexors play a role as well. And then the muscles that stabilize us are our glutes, which a lot of people think calves are actually more propulsive than glutes. Glutes actually play more of a role in stabilizing our pelvis. And then we have some small hip rotators that help stabilize us. And then a lot of the deep trunk muscles are needed to fire on to stabilize us. Biking wise, again, our quads are going to be our main power generators. Our glutes also generate a lot of force biking. Hamstrings and calves will also kick on as well. Stabilizers, we need our back extensors to be stable when we're lean forward on the bike. We need our neck muscles to be stable. I think everyone's probably dealt with some kind of neck pain or upper back pain after a long ride. Same thing, we need our shoulder blade stabilizers to be stable. Then in swimming, our major movers are kind of most of our upper body muscles. So our lats, our pecs, our trapezius muscles, our deltoids, which are our shoulder muscles, serratus anterior, which is a muscle on the front of the trunk, on the rib cage, and then our rotator cuff muscles. And then our rotator cuff muscles actually both move and stabilize in swimming. They're very important there. And again, our shoulder blade muscles, our scapular muscles, our axis stabilizers, and then again, we need our deep trunk muscles to stabilize as we're trying to coordinate arm and leg movement. So if we look, a little bit hard to see here, but anatomy wise, so when we talk about our major movers with running, we have our calf muscles. We got our big calf muscle up here, our smaller soleus down here. Both are very important for the run gait. Quads, very important for biking and running. Our glutes give us some power from biking, stabilize while running. Hamstrings give us a little bit of power for both. And then we've got our glutes on the outside of the hip that really help stabilize the pelvis while running, that become, a lot of times these will become weak in a lot of runners because they have to stabilize, but we tend to neglect them a little bit. And then in our upper body, if we talk about our major movers with swimming, our lats are a big player there. Pecs are a big player, our deltoids, which are our shoulder muscles there. Then our rotator cuff is actually these kind of little muscles that sit on the back of the shoulder blade, play a big role. in our swimming stability and motion. And then for all three disciplines, these deep core muscles that sort of wrap around the core and attach onto the spine to give stability, kind of create like this corset-like force throughout the trunk to keep the spine nice and stable, are important. So we've got, you know, some deep abdominal muscles here. We've got our obliques that are very important with that. There's some muscles that kind of run between the segments of the spine as well. And then this is kind of researchy and pretty technical, but it's some pictures just of when different muscles are activated at different points of swim, bike, run. So this, you know, diagram here kind of just goes over the different arm muscles when they're activated at different phases of the swim stroke. This here, I really like this graphic. You have to kind of study it though, but it just shows when different muscles are activated at different points in our pedal stroke. So, you know, I've got our quads, our glutes kind of at the push down phase, and then the hamstrings and quads or calves tend to kick on a little bit later. And then this is really technical, but this is just, you know, muscle activity during run gait. But the main takeaways here kind of on this the bottom left to our kind of at the calf muscles, that early, like the 0 to 25% on the bottom axis there is our stance phase. So our two calf muscles are very active during that stance phase at generating force. And then also kind of far right in the middle, that's our quads. And you can see those are also very active at generating force in that stance phase. That's just the sources for those figures, if anyone wants to look into them a little further. All right, so we've got these, you know, our muscles that need our strength and stability with triathlon. So how do we go about exercising them? So I kind of broke this presentation down into, there's not things that are purely strength or purely stability, but just for simplicity purposes, I kind of broke this presentation down into talking about, you know, exercises that are more stability based versus more that are exercises that are more aimed at building the ability of those triathlon specific muscles to produce force. So our stability exercises are things that try to work those kind of smaller stabilizers muscles. And so these are our exercises that are going to end up being kind of lower load, longer duration, higher rep. That are going to work on the things like those glutes, like those deep abdominals, those spinal stabilizers. I didn't talk about it yet, but the small foot muscles, our single leg balance, our single leg stability is very, very key to our ability to control our run gait. And the small foot muscles are a part of that. And also our shoulder blade stabilizers. So this is what most people think about as kind of the quote unquote core work. When they say they want to do a core session, it's the work that's aimed at working on these small stabilizer trunk muscles in general, or glutes. It's a very good place to start for new athletes and for those with no lifting background. Just want to really make sure that we are stable before we start trying to throw these higher loads onto bigger movements. It's also very good for injury prone athletes that have specific imbalances or poor motor control that need to be addressed. And those are specific weaknesses or form deviations that might need to be addressed. But with that, experienced athletes will still benefit from this. I mean, kind of consider it like an insurance policy in terms of going back to that injury prevention. We want these small stabilizer muscles to really be working as they should. So there's sky's the limit with the number of variations for stability exercises, but some basics are, I'll go through a few pictures of these, but just any sort of plank progression. So our front planks, our side planks, we can, you know, add in leg raises. We can go from the elbows or from the hands, anything along those lines. There's also different abdominal bracing progressions. So these are things where we kind of, those deep muscles that wrap around the core and attach to the spine, this is where we try to contract those muscles and add arm and leg movements to them while focusing on keeping a stable spine. We also have our bridge progressions. I think probably most people know what a bridge is, but just on the back, knees bent, lifting the hips up. And again, there's a whole bunch of variations of those: double leg, single leg. You can add bands, balls, marches. And then back extension exercises or stability exercises. So things like Superman's back extension, bird dogs in that category. Rotation is another good one to hit with stability exercises. So, you know, Russian twists, which are just, you know, twisting back and forth with a medicine ball, or Palloff press, which is actually just kind of statically resisting rotation. Single leg balance exercises will get in our little foot muscles and then also our lateral hips. And then our lateral hip strengthening falls into this. So, walks with them, lateral walks with a band around the ankles, or clamshells, or doing like a side leg lift against a wall fall into that category. So just some examples. These pictures were taken in our clinic at the height of the pandemic, obviously, but here we have a few different plank progressions. So front plank, side plank, front plank with a leg raise. Abdominal bracing. So this would be a dead bug exercise. It's just keeping the core nice and tight while extending an arm and leg back and trying to keep the back from arching. And then kind of our classic bird dog on all fours, extending an arm and leg, trying to keep the spine stable there. All right, so that's more of our stability work. So when we talk about kind of our more traditional strength training that people think about, like going to a gym and doing lifting, when we talk about strength training for triathlon, I like to think of things as, generally speaking, to train movements and not muscles. I mean, sometimes there will be cases where you will want to train muscles, especially, if someone has had like a chronic tendon issue, it does make sense to train that muscle and load the tendon. But generally speaking, for, our fitness perspective, we want to train these major movements. So these major movements are generally thought of as a squat, and I'll get it more into this, a hinge, a push, a pull, and a carry. And I kind of threw a miscellaneous under carry, but I'll get to that. So these major movements will be mostly comprehensive, and they will work most of our triathlon specific movers and stabilizers. And there are some things, as I said before, you might want to give some extra attention to some specific running and triathlon specific muscles. For example, those athlete specific weaknesses. And I added calves on there because they are so important with running, and it does help to kind of specifically target them strength wise, especially in more masters athletes as well, because they do tend to lose strength, and you start to lose a little bit of power run wise. So our squat. So basically, I mean, squat is, again, most people probably know what a squat is. It's our sit to stand like motion with hip and knee extension. It's considered more of an up down motion. And it works our quadriceps, it works our hamstrings, our glutes, and to a lesser degree, our calves and our back extensors. So again, a lot of those muscles that are kind of the muscles that we use to generate force for biking and running. It also kind of activates our deep and superficial abdominals, the inside of our hips, our adductors, and our lateral hips in order to stabilize. So it hits those a little bit too, depending on the variations. So there's, again, a lot of different variations of squats. You can do squats, back squats, so loading with a weight on the back, loading with a weight on the front, goblet squat, which is holding a kettlebell in front of you. And then the split squat is in the single leg squat. These tend to be a little bit, you start getting into more of single leg loading, which is a little bit more run specific. So, eventually working into those is beneficial for most people. So for example, we've got, this is just a good place to start for most people. It's a goblet squat, just holding the kettlebell in front of you. In the middle is a rear foot elevated split squat. This will load the front leg by kind of more preferentially. It also helps kick on those muscles on the outside of the hips to a greater degree. So it gets a little bit more run specific. And then finally, we have a single leg squat, which can be kind of considered a stability exercise as well. So after the squat, we have the hinge. So the hinge, it's a little bit harder to describe. It's kind of harder to teach to most people. A lot of people kind of think they're very similar motions to the squat, but it's kind of more of a horizontal motion than a squat. So instead of kind of this up, down, knees and hips bending, that's more about sticking the hips back and making the hips a fulcrum point. So this is kind of our traditional deadlift. It becomes important to triathlon, especially because if you think about a bike motion, you're kind of sitting on the bike with your hips back, trunk forward, and trying to generate force through your legs. That's pretty specific to this hinge motion. The hinge, kind of more than the squat, will work the posterior chain a little bit more. So it works those glutes, it really works those hamstrings. It works those extensors of the trunk. It also draws in the quads. And depending on the type of resistance you use, if you're holding a hex bar, that will draw in some of those shoulder blade muscles. So some of our variations or examples, so I have pictures of these, would just be our standard deadlift, a Romanian deadlift, single leg Romanian deadlift, and then just kind of hinge hold combinations, which would just be kind of getting into a hinge position and doing various upper extremity work, like rows or that kind of thing. So here we have our hinge variation. So again, it's a a little bit of a subtle difference than a squat, in that instead of like the trunk and the hips and the knees bending, it's more sticking the hips back. And generally when you're doing these hinge variations, you should feel kind of a pull throughout the hamstrings, and the weight is moving more straight up and down. The hex bar is really the best way to do it. It tends to be the best way to load it if you have access to it. And then on the far right is a single leg version of a Romanian deadlift. So the difference between standard and the Romanian deadlift is just where you start from with the weight. So next major motion is a push. So push is essentially as it sounds, thinking of like pushing a door or pushing against a wall, that kind of thing. So the push has a lot of carryover to our swim propulsion, and it also has a lot of carryover to our upper extremity support while cycling when you're holding yourself up on your arms for hours on end. This works mostly the muscles on our front of our chest. So our pecs, our deltoids, our shoulder muscles. It also, secondary muscles are kind of our triceps, and then that serratus anterior, that shoulder blade muscle that muscle on the rib cage that provides a lot of stability to the shoulder blade. So variations of our push would be our standard push-up, a bench press, incline press, overhead press, shoulder press, or chest press. There we have just a push variation, which would be just kind of a standard dumbbell bench press there. Next, we have our pull. Again, that's as it sounds. So instead of pushing the door, it's pulling the door. So this pull, I think, you have to prioritize one. I would prioritize a pull over a push, just because it's very, very important for our bike and run posture. We tend to just be sitting all day. A lot of people, the front of their chests will get very shortened, and the back of their upper backs will get, very weak, very stretched out. So these are very important for helping get us into a better posture. The pull muscles also work our swim specific strength. They are very important for our shoulder blade stability, and then kind of just our mechanics of our upper back and our arms. So the muscles worked here are, again, all of our back muscles. So our lat muscles, our traps, which kind of run from the shoulder blade to the spine. Biceps are a little bit of a secondary mover. Again, rotator cuff is a little bit of a secondary mover. And then the back part of our deltoid, the back part of our shoulder muscles, and rhomboids, which are, again, another muscle that runs from the shoulder blade to the spine. So some variations of this, the classic pull is just a row. Also lat pull downs, pull ups are our main variations of a pull. So again, pull variations. On our left, we have a lat pull down machine. And on the right is a pull up, where I was kind of dying, waiting for my husband to take a picture there. But those are, some of our main pull variations. And then finally, we have this kind of carry category. So this final category will be different depending on the source you look at. Some people will throw rotation in there. My personal preference is just this final category is kind of anything that challenges sort of the lower extremity strength and the trunk strength and control in triathlon, specific ways that doesn't necessarily fit into a squat or a hinge. So I think of this as things like farmer's carry, so where you're just basically walking, carrying a weight, focusing on keeping the trunk level, or our different lunge variations or step ups. So again, this is going to work things like our quads, our glutes, our calves, our lateral hips, and trunk stabilizers mostly. So for a few samples here, we have just a lateral lunge and then a backwards lunge, which I tend to prefer a little bit to a front lunge, just because that pushing off that back leg is kind of a little bit more of a run specific motion. And then finally, kind of as I touched on before, the other calves, they're key to our run propulsion. So it's worthwhile to add calf raises to the routine, whether it's just standing on the edge of the step or eventually trying to add in some extra weight. And then under here, I kind of also threw in plyometrics and power. So again, this is more for somebody who's pretty advanced with weightlifting, is good, is strong, stable overall. What this does is it utilizes that stretch shortening cycle. So it's that spring-like. So it's when muscles are stretched, they will then shorten and generate power. And this is trying to kind of plan that and use that cycle to improve our power, to improve the amount of force we can put out per unit time. So again, mostly this would be with advanced athletes. This is when you see people doing things like box jumps or counter movement jumps, that kind of thing. But even less experienced lifters can still benefit from some kind of simple exercises that have plyometric qualities to them. So simple things like jump rope actually is a very good simple thing most people can do that does have kind of utilizes this stretch shortening cycle, or pogo jumps, which is pretty much just doing like small jumps in place. And that's actually kind of a good test too coming off an injury, but to make sure that you can handle running loads. And then kettlebell swings. So just, coming from a squat position, swinging up and coming back down. All right, so now we have all these, different types of exercises. How do we think about putting all this stuff together and designing a program that will cover most of our bases? I mean, there's a million exercises you can choose from, but generally speaking, when you go to do a strength program, if you choose one of these major movement variations from each category, it will cover most of your bases. So, but some of the things you want to consider are just individual needs. So you'll notice with both squats and hinges, there were double leg versions and single leg versions. An athlete who might struggle with just top end power on the bike would probably benefit actually more from a double leg version, just because it allows you to load it up a little bit more and develop more strength. Whereas somebody who struggles just with, run gait isn't very stable on one foot, it tends to not have the best balance, they might benefit more from kind of erring towards the single leg versions of things without quite as much load on them. Also upper versus lower body. A lot of athletes are just time constrained. So, if you have a runner who's coming into triathlon, they might tend to pick, they only have time for 2 or 3 exercises, do a push and a pull, versus a swimmer coming into cycling might want to focus more on developing lower body strength. Again, add calves. And then obviously equipment availability and time is a huge consideration. Ideally, we would have athletes going to the gym and using squat racks and row machines and lat pull down machines and have access to all sorts of dumbbells, but that's not always the case. So sometimes we just need to get creative in using what athletes have at home and to develop a program. As far as frequency, how often should we lift? 2 times, because this is kind of supposed to focus on off-season lifting, 2 times a week in the off-season will be sufficient to really give us some good benefits. And then once we switch more to a competition phase, it can be maintained with 1 time a week with strength training. Load and reps. So I think, when a lot of people think of strength training for endurance sports, in the past, there was, that thought that endurance athletes should be doing low load and high rep because they're doing endurance sports. But all of swim, bike, running for triathlon training is low load, high rep work. So in order to focus on strength and get stronger, we actually want to do higher weights and higher loads and lower reps to really work on our ability to generate force versus kind of being more redundant to what we're already doing. The exception to this is initially someone who is new to strength training or who hasn't strength trained in a while. We want to focus on developing proper form and just increasing the tissue's ability to handle loads. So for these athletes, we want to start off with lighter loads. We want to start off with higher reps which would be in the 8 to 12, maybe 8 to 15 rep range. And this should be kind of a moderate perceived exertion, about a 5 to 7 out of 10. And this can, this initial adaptation phase, if you want to call it, would last anywhere from 2 to 8 weeks, depending on the athlete and their experience level. For more basic strength gains, to try to improve our muscles' ability to generate force, this is when we want to think in terms of using lower reps. I put 4 to 8. You'll see some sources even say as low as like 2 to 6. And we want to use higher weights and resistances in order to get the most benefit. So this should be a higher rating of perceived exertion, which is about a 7 to 9 out of 10. I didn't put, for the load, I didn't put like percentage of 1 rep max or anything in there, just because a lot of times, endurance athletes aren't going to be going to the gym and doing a 1 rep max and, have this exact number they're shooting for. So really, it should feel hard. But at the same time, again, we're endurance athletes. We're not bodybuilders. We're not, competitive weightlifters. So you don't need to go to complete failure. There's a lot of risk involved in that, and there's not much additional reward over, doing a few sets at lower reps with a weight that does get hard, but is not, leaving you on the ground. So how about our sets and then our rest between the sets? So again, 3 sets of each exercise is generally considered sufficient. You can, play with that a little bit. In terms of rest breaks, so there's research that's been done on how long to rest between sets. Longer rests are kind of thought to allow for greater intensities than loads to be lifted, thus leading to more strength gains, while shorter rests are kind of thought to have more hormonal benefits because they raise growth hormone to a greater degree and then promote muscle hypertrophy, so muscle growth more. Research is mixed here, but it does it just suggests that the rest interval doesn't have a huge impact on strength gains, provided that you are able to maintain the intensity of your lifting. So usually, 1 to 3 minutes. And then this can also just be dependent on athlete time considerations. People don't necessarily have 3 minutes to sit around at the gym between sets. Another suggestion here would be supersets. So this supersets involves kind of going back and forth between 2 exercises that work different parts of the body. So that would be, maybe doing a set of squats and then going over and doing a set of rows and going back and forth between the 2. So essentially you're resting the legs while working the arms and vice versa. As far as progression, just like we need to progress our swim, bike, and run training in order to make gains, we need to also progress our strength training in order to make gains. So we need to progressively overload our muscles to continue to gain strength. So again, there's a whole bunch of different variables that we can play with. You can increase weights, you can increase sets, reps, you can add instability challenges, you can combine movements, like maybe do a step up with an overhead press. The simplest way the best way probably is to increase weights as you go along. But that's not always possible. Again, that's not always possible because if people are lifting at home with the equipment they might have a finite amount of weight. So that's where you might want to, increase sets. And, if you end up increasing reps, it's not like you're not going to still gain strength from that because it is still an increased load. And really, you want to just kind of choose one thing at a time to progress, just like you wouldn't add a whole bunch of run volume and a whole bunch of run intensity at once. You would want to just pick one variable and stick with that as what you're progressing to avoid overloading yourself. Then how about do you want to vary the exercises you do, or do you want to stick with the same routine? So again, there's a million different ways to vary exercises in terms of single versus double legs. You can do wide grips, narrow grips. You can use machines or free weights, stable versus unstable surfaces. Research kind of suggests that you want to have your variation in exercises be systematic and planned. So you don't want to be super redundant, but you also don't want to just be kind of wildly doing different exercises all the time, or else you're never going to, gain strength that way either. So my general suggestion, the way I like to do it, is to just kind of if you're lifting 2 days a week, you have 1 day a week where you do one set of exercises, 1 day a week where you do another set of exercises, and stick with that throughout like a 4 to 6 week block. So this might look like, on a Tuesday, you do your goblets double leg squat, whereas on a Thursday, you're going to do a split squat. So it's still, one day is one squat motion, the other day is another squat motion. So it's working similar muscles, but in slightly different ways, and then stick with that through that block. All right, so what about those stability exercises? How do we work those in? So again, this is our supportive work, our insurance policy that's more for our kind of injury prevention, our good form, and preventing and correcting imbalances. One way to do it is just to add a few exercises to the ends of our lift session. So, you do your 5 major movements, and then you can add 2 to 3 of these stability core exercises on at the end. Or you can just, it's pretty simple. These are practical, they're accessible, there's minimal equipment required. You can get in a pretty good stability session in just like 15 to 20 minutes, 1 to 3 times a week by hitting the major areas. So I kind of think of, when you're doing a stability session, you want to work the front of the body. So, the front abdominals. So that'd be things like our planks and our abdominal bracing exercises. You want to work your sides. So those obliques, those lateral hip muscles, these would be things like our side planks or our monster walks or any of our rotational movements. You want to work your back. So this would be our bridges, bird dogs, Supermans, anything along those lines. And then add in something that challenges single leg balance. In terms of sets and reps for stability sessions, this you actually do, these are our endurance muscles. So we do want to try to get them go to fatigue with these while maintaining good form. So that's the key. You don't want to force, a 5-minute plank if your butt's coming up and your hips are dropping, and you don't want to, do 30 bridges with leg raises with knee extensions if your hips are starting to rotate. You want to just kind of go to what you can keep control of the core on. So again, these tend to be higher rep, more endurance focused. And in order to progress them, there's a lot of different ways to progress these. You can increase the reps or hold times to a point. Again, that goes back to that maintaining good form. The other point with this too is, if you're doing 50 reps of a stability exercise, or you're holding a plank for 5 minutes, this is when you want to think about it, just increasing the difficulty of the exercise instead of doing a million reps. So this may be like adding in a leg raise to a plank would be more useful than just increasing time ad nauseum. Progressions that you can add bands, you can add weights and unstable surfaces like stability balls or TRX are pretty effective at making these more difficult, or decrease points of support. So kind of like I already said, raise a leg with planks, when you do a bridge, march the legs, etc. In terms of fitting it in with other workouts, so off season is the perfect time to start. I think kind of the typical athlete, myself included, we will start our season with these good intentions, saying we're going to do our strength training, our stability work, but then we get into these heavier training blocks, we're tired, we have life responsibilities that need to get tended to, and then the imbalances start to develop. We might start to get a little bit of a niggle that creeps in, but by that time you're almost to your goal race and you taper and you feel better, but then you kind of repeat and fall into this trap. And I think a lot of times we also say to ourselves, I'll rest at the end of the season, and these like little things that will hurt will go away. But in a way that can actually make things worse, especially, as I said before, our tendons like to be loaded. So if we just completely rest everything, it will, and eventually just weaken our problem areas, and it won't correct the imbalances that caused them in the first place. So longer term solution is to really address our strength work in the off season. Another reason it's good to start in the off season is because expect soreness when first starting up. That's normal when adding in a strength routine. And it's a lot easier to work around being sore from lifting when you're not doing these key swim, bike, and run sessions in the off season. Another reason it's important, it can be used while in off season, is because hard endurance training can impair strength gains. There's just, some hormonal impacts that make it harder to really maximize our strength gains while doing hard endurance training. So there's less interference of this in off season. And this is, especially important for our athletes that will benefit from trying to gain muscle mass. So I kind of, my example here would be, again, the runner turning to triathlon who might benefit from putting on some upper body muscle in order to swim a little better, or our masters athletes, that are just going to start losing muscle mass with age. And that, can apply to anyone really like 35 plus. It will benefit from, putting in a strength focus to counteract our normal age related losses in muscle mass. And then just obviously time considerations and logistics. It's a lot easier to fit in strength training in the off season when we're not doing 5-hour rides. As far as what days to put your strength trainings on, ideally, we would have our hard days hard and our easy days easy. So, I mean, if you're doing harder workouts in the off season, ideally, you would want to wait several hours to kind of recover from the harder endurance work and then do lifting, and then recover from all on easy days. But in reality, most people, don't have time for that. Most of people, our easier days are shorter, so we have more time then. So the only thing I would recommend there is to, this is life, it happens, but try to avoid doing heavy lifting the day before any sort of similar intense workout. So you wouldn't want to do heavy squats the day before bike sprints. You generally can get away with lifting heavy and then doing just some easier or endurance focused workouts the following day. And again, off season is a good time, so you have more flexibility here. It's not like you have to be as rigid and keeping hard days on certain days of the week. So with that, I kind of talked about a lot here, but for somebody looking to get started on a strength program who doesn't necessarily want to have gym membership, there's just some equipment basics or recommendations that I have that will cover a lot of bases and allow you to load up a lot of different exercises at home. So bands, I mean, it's straight bands that most people, just straight band. You can use these small loop bands. So these little like Perform Better, there's a million different brands of those. These are great. You can put them around the ankles or knees and just, they're great for loading the outside of the hips on a lot of exercises. You can use them a ton of different ways. I also like these larger loop bands. So sometimes you'll see them called pull-up assist bands. Those are kind of on the top right there. Those are, those just show someone doing a hip extension with them. They can actually be used, if you stand on the bottom and put them over the shoulders, they can be used to load up a squat. They're very, very versatile. So that's another recommendation. And then if you can get, some hands on just some like 10 to 25 pound dumbbells or kettlebells, and those will be very, very versatile. You can do chest press with them, overhead press, like bent over rows. The weights on the bottom left there are, you can get the super expensive, fancy adjustable weight dumbbells. I mean, the ones on the bottom left are kind of a simpler model. We have some that we found on Craigslist that were not expensive at all, but that work very, very well for a variety of exercises. The TRX, or the suspension trainer, on the bottom right, that is again a very versatile tool that you can use to add an element of instability to a lot of exercises, which will add an element of making it more difficult. And so you'll see the person doing a row there with the TRX. The stability ball I like in terms of a lot of different stability exercises as well. And then just kind of having a designated space for your strength work and for your stability work in the house is helpful, because it kind of sets that tone of, I am here to do this and get this done. And then in terms of some additional resources that are great for giving visuals of a lot of what I just talked about, or giving videos of specific workouts, the Strength and Conditioning for Endurance Running book is great. I also like Running Rewired by Jay Dakari. These two books also go through some self-assessments, so you can kind of figure out maybe where you might be a little weak, where you might want to focus some stability work. etc. And then these couple of just online social media, they're actually both physical therapists, so my bias a little bit there, but Chris Johnson is a PT and a triathlete out in Washington State, but he gives a lot of good advice on his Instagram account, and then his website is a great resource. It has various exercise videos that are kind of categorized into different squats and pulls and that kind of thing. The Dallas Run Clinic, they also, I mean, their Instagram is a little bit more focused on injuries and injury prevention, but their YouTube links in their bio also have some great resources that have great videos of different exercises that are beneficial to runners and triathletes. And then some references there. And finally, questions. Okay.
Yeah, so just if anyone has questions, just feel free to put them in the chat box, or you're welcome to come off of mute right now and ask Jennie any questions that you might have.
Hey, Jennie, it's Mike. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Just juggling 50 things, but great stuff. The question, I would have is like for an absolute beginner.
Yeah.
Where would you typically start? Let's, if you had, you didn't have any injuries,
Okay.
and you're balanced. Where do you think you would be the first thing you would focus if you were grabbing any type of equipment?
I would probably start with, probably like body weight squats and, teaching how to do a proper hinge. And then I would probably do like a banded row, just light, getting the motion down, getting the shoulder blade motion down, and, adding in, starting kind of simple with the stability exercises too. So just teaching a proper abdominal brace and a simple bridge, that kind of thing. So just starting at really the lowest level of basic movements before adding any load.
Cool. Thank you.
Okay, we have a question in the chat box asking if you can show the slide again with the books and website.
Yep. There we are.
Hi, this is Sharon. I have a question for you. So I haven't done triathlons in a really, really long time because I had a neuroma in my foot. So I finally got that taken care of. And so I'm getting back, but I also now have some knee injuries.
Okay.
And so I'm going to walk. I'm not planning on running.
Okay.
But I know I really want to strengthen everything around my knee so I can get through that walk part. So what are your suggestions?
There's a lot of evidence that shows that actually what goes on at the hips can control the knees. So a lot of that lateral hip strengthening, those banded walks, that kind of stuff will be beneficial for knees. I also would kind of put a little bit of a focus just on single leg stability too. So, I mean, even if it just starts with balancing and, moving the other leg around a little bit, that in ways that don't bother the knee, that would be another good place to start, and just getting that control over what happens at the knees in a single leg stance.
Perfect. Thank you.
A couple, some more questions are showing up in the chat box. One question from Jeff: any thoughts on squat racks?
Yeah, I mean, well, in terms of like their value as a tool, or
Jeff, if you want to come off mute and
Follow up, that would have been.
Hi, Jennie.
Hi.
Yeah, I swim at the WAC sometimes next to you. So yeah,
Okay.
you guys rock and roll. I got to catch up on all your fun stuff you were just at. But anyways, yeah, with the squat rack, yeah, is it worth an investment to gain strength in the off season, even in addition to some of the band work, I guess, is my question.
Yeah. I mean, I am a big fan of squat racks. I think they allow you to just be able to really load up some exercises in a pretty valuable way. So, I mean, if it's something you have access to, it's a very valuable tool. I'm a fan.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. What? I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Okay, we have a two-part question here. So first part of the question is, I seem to always be in training session running a marathon every 4 months. How do you suggest I load my strength training? And then the follow-up to that is also, how about closer to run race day, like taper time?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, it's if you're kind of always in season, I would, with that, I mean, I would say you don't want to really like jump right into heavy lifting immediately after a marathon. You want to definitely recover from that. But, you know, if you're have this 4-month block to work with, you know, the first month would be probably just recovery, stability exercises, you know, body weight stuff, going through ranges of motion, and then trying to work a little bit heavier strength kind of in that 1 to 3 to 2 month time frame out from the race. And you know, kind of as I was saying before, if you can get in like maybe 4 to 6 weeks of twice a week of heavier lifting, and then in the final, you know, 6 to 8 weeks before the race, even just do once a week to try to maintain some of those strength gains, that probably be the best way to go about it. And I think the main thing too is just getting past that initial hump of where you might be sore from the heavier lifting, having that coincide more with just, you know, your base endurance training versus when you're starting to try to do super long runs or harder runs or anything like that.
Okay, there's questions are coming in. So another question, one wants to know if they can have a copy of the slide presentation.
Yeah, I figure if there's a way that I can upload it anywhere. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think probably so. The presentation itself, the recording of today, will be up on the QT2 Systems YouTube channel, so you're able to watch that at any point. And then probably we can have here, I'm going to type in my email here
Okay.
in the chat box. So it's reem@therunformula.com. So if you would like a copy of the presentation, just reach out to me, and Jenny, you can just send it to me. Okay. All right. So next one here. Oh, this is going to be a fun one from Vanessa. What would you recommend for someone who has had IT band syndrome for 10 years, has been to 4 different physical therapists across these 10 years, and has done every glute and hip stabilizing exercises you can imagine, as well as keeping up with all the exercises?
That's a lot of questions.
It's a lot of-
I don't have a good answer for that one. I gotta be honest. I mean, it's yeah. I mean, if it sounds like you've kind of already done everything, you know, it's probably I would seek another medical opinion, to be honest.
All right. Does anyone else have any questions? All right. I think we're all set then. Thank you, Jenny, for presenting this evening. Thanks for everyone who joined us now. And like I said, it will be it has been recorded, and it will be available on the QT2 Systems YouTube channel for viewing at any point in the future.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a good evening.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thanks, Jenny.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.